All right. Well, I am excited to be here, and I've enjoyed the week so far, and everything's been just great. What I'm going to do for Sunday school this morning again is give the biblical basis for faith promise. So let me read first, then we'll pray, and then we will get into this and go from there. I'm going to read just two verses to start off with. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 15 and 16. And again, I'm going to lay out for you the biblical basis of faith promise, why we do this. All right, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, two verses here, verse 15 and 16. Not boasting of things without our measure, that is, of other men's labors, but having hope, when your faith is increased, that we shall be enlarged by you according to our rule abundantly, to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in other men's line of things made ready to our hand. But he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. Let's go ahead and pray. Father in heaven, Lord, I love you. Lord, I ask your blessing upon Sunday school this morning. Lord, I pray that you guide my thoughts. Lord, help me to speak clearly. Again, guide what I say and how I say it. Help me to stay true to your word. Lord, help me to present this in a way that it would be of understanding, Lord, that you'd put it in our hearts, that we could see why we do what we do. And Lord, you'd use it to strengthen our faith and give us confidence, Lord, in you and in your word. And especially today, Lord, towards the cause of world missions. May you be glorified and honored. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. I was in New Guinea just a couple of years, and there was this forum at the time. I'd spent a couple of years debating back and forth different things on it. You can almost name it. It was there. Calvinism. I had a set debate going through Calvinism on that thing. And then it's around the same time frame that a lot of independent Baptist churches were really getting attacked. There was this enormous movement that came up that was against really independent Baptist churches. And the majority of it was started by people who had actually left. In some cases, there were some legitimate gripes and genuine abuse things taking place. But it kind of exploded into things where almost anything and everything an independent Baptist church did was horrible. And so in this forum, there was a group of them that attacked faith promise missions giving. And I'm like, they were just looking for anything to attack. And so they started attacking faith promise missions giving. So I figured, I'm going to have to get into this. I mean, they really have no clue at why we did it. All right? And that was true. That was one of the faults we had. There was so much that we did in our churches that nobody knew why we did it. That there was never a biblical argument given. Well, this is why we have this position. This is why we have this position. Many times it was just shouted and that was supposed to be good enough, but that never is. The basis of our foundation isn't based on how loud somebody says something. It should be based on Bible doctrine that is clear. And then what's pretty neat, brother, so there's another guy that really got into it first. He was doing a great job. And so both of us became the voice for faith promise in it, of going back and forth. And I could not find his arguments I wanted to. He was making a case actually from the book of Genesis for it. I remember reading it thinking, man, that's really neat what he's doing. And so we started a relationship apart. We started emailing and messaging back and forth. And he was a missionary like I was. So I'm in New Guinea as a missionary, and he was in Japan, just north of Misawa. There's like a rock island north of Misawa, Hokkaido or something like that. Is that right? And he was there. And brother, now get this. So as we're talking, he was much older than I was. He is the grandson of John R. Rice. Yes, he is the son of one of his daughters. And it was pretty neat. We got into it. But there's much that people just never understood. And I think it helps you to see faith promise and why we do this. So this is what I want to do. So let's talk for a second here about what's taking place in 2 Corinthians, the setting for this. And I'm going to this is pretty neat because it'll even tie into my Sunday morning message with this when I'm going to be focusing more on Paul's second missionary journey. This letter was written on his third missionary journey. What had happened was, on his third missionary journey, if you're familiar with it, he spent most of his time at Ephesus. While at Ephesus, he wrote 1 Corinthians. If you know anything about 1 Corinthians, that's a tough letter. So he sends out 1 Corinthians as soon as he gets to Ephesus about the problems that were going on there to try and straighten them out. And Paul, it's true of any pastor, if you're a genuine pastor, Paul was greatly concerned at how it was going to be received because it was much rebuke. And when you're in this position, you have to do some sort of rebuke. You're not happy about it. Your stomach's in knots. You want to throw up. You can't sleep at night. Any of those. All that's taking place. You're wondering, how is that received? And so Paul was very anxious about it. It got much worse for him because when he leaves Ephesus, he heads up to Troas. All right. And we're in modern day Turkey. He's down at one coast. He heads up to the west coast where Troas is sitting. And while he's there, he was expecting Titus to meet him. Titus was supposed to show up in Troas and give a report of how the letter was received. Well, guess what happens when he gets to Troas? Titus doesn't show up. Paul is anxious as anything. He's trying to minister there as well. He's actually taking that time to even get a church started in Troas. He'd been there one other time, the Macedonian call for the second missionary journey, but now he's actually getting a church established there. And so he actually leaves everybody behind, and he takes off into Europe, just across the, the Aegean Sea right there. Crosses over, gets to Philippi, and Titus shows up. Titus shows up, and he is relieved. The letter was received how he was hoping it was going to be received. And so then it's right here that Paul writes this letter. And the reason why Paul was going back into Troas before going back to Jerusalem to report back, this is at the conclusion of his third missionary journey, was to collect an offering for what was taking place in Jerusalem because of the suffering that was there. And he had concerns of when he got, especially when he got to Corinth, and that's one of the reasons for this letter. One was to let him know how glad he was at how they received the first letter. But he was also concerned with all the problems the church had, that they weren't going to give like they should have toward the need that was in Jerusalem. And Paul made it clear, and I don't have time to go into that, but what he was expecting of the churches of Macedonia was actually a decent offering. They needed a lot of help. And it's kind of like reverse missions. It's kind of funny. The offering he stays from the mission church is going back to one of the supporting churches. It's pretty neat how it takes place. And so anyhow, this is the setting of this. Now, let's tie this into what we see here and in chapter 8 and maybe a couple of verses in chapter 9 about faith promise. So let's get into, in our time frame, how faith promise got started. The term is credited to a man named A.B. Simpson, who was a 19th century Canadian preacher, the founder of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, if you're familiar with that. He's the one who coined the term and started this principle taking off. And he based it on the verses we just read, verses 15 and 16. And the text certainly does fit. Again, the Corinth church had problems. Paul was going to be taking up an offering for help the need that existed back in Jerusalem. He wanted the church to follow through to do what he had instructed, what they said they would do. And Paul is dealing, listen, when I see your faith increased, this is dealing with, of course, spiritually we could apply it, seeing their faith increase, but more specifically to context, it is dealing with that offering of what would take place, that he knows it was tied to their faith with what they would give. And then Paul even ties it beyond the need that was in Jerusalem. But verse 16, how this could help to preach the gospel in the regions beyond. So what Paul was asking the churches had nothing to do with their tithe, was a separate offering provided to give to a specific need that Paul also recognized would help in the cause of world missions altogether. He even saw that as such. Because basically there was a need. He went to the churches for it. They would need a special offering for this to take place. And he was asking to do that by faith. As your faith increased, base it on that. And of course, the need we're dealing with on a missions conference that most Baptist churches do once a year is the need of world missions. And saying, listen, this is a need. When missionaries head overseas, they don't have the, which I appreciate your pastor's labor in that, having to be bivocational right now with the work in with that. But when I was in New Guinea, I could not have worked. I wasn't allowed. My visa was a religious visa. I was not allowed to make $1 from that country. I would have got kicked out had I did that. And so faith promise is a systematic approach to giving to world missions. It's what got organized in a structured way that we could see, that we could pray about, that would, and really it was very effective. We've seen God bless it over the years. I saw it as a member of a church. I experienced it as a missionary. And I also, let me give you some examples from my experience with it as a missionary. I can think of 2 churches, one that I was a member of, and then one that was a supporting church of mine in New Guinea. If I gave many of you would know this church if I was to say this one supporting church. It's a fairly well-known church in our circles. You would know the pastor. They were a supporting church of mine, and I had preached a couple of times. They took us on, and I went to them and asked, because I never heard of nothing really of missions ever. I just happened to be in the area quite a bit, in and out, so I got to know the preacher a little bit. We went on a couple of visits, and then he asked me to preach. And then they took us on for support. It was a fairly good-sized church of about 600-700 people. And of all my churches, I had about 70 supporting churches that supported us in New Guinea. Of all my supporting churches, this was one of the bigger ones with 600 people in attendance. The average, Baptist church is probably between 70 and 170. And hands down, the least faithful church I had. If they sent something one month, usually the amount was about $25. All right? That was never consistent. In a 12-month time frame when I was there, I would usually see the $25 3 to 4 times. That was it. That was it. That's all they did. It's a church of 600 in an area in the country, to be honest, that was economically strong. There was a lot of really, really good paying jobs in the area, and they got a church of 600, and they could not even get $25 to their missionaries on the field on a regular basis each month. They struggled with that. You want to know why? He wanted nothing to do with faith promise. He didn't want anything to do with... You know how he did his missions? This was the whole emphasis. And again, everything rises and falls on leadership, and this was a good example of that, brother. It was what they gave in Sunday school. Whatever pocket change got put into Sunday school, they would divide up and send out to their missionaries. And by the way, the church did have a lot of trouble. I mean, just from getting to know him, they had a lot of different trouble financially. You want to know why I think that is? Because he never gave to missions. Never had God's blessing on that. So he's going to have all these nightmares and all these troubles and all this stuff popping up. And then there was another church that I was a member of. It was a very short time. It was actually me and my wife had just gotten married and no kids yet. We head off to New Mexico. We spent the majority of the time as members of Berean Baptist Church. So that was just getting started when we arrived there. And but there was a church there that would fold within a year of our arrival there. And one of the reasons it folded, it had many, many problems with it. But one of the reasons was the missions program. During the time that I was there, which was just about a year before it collapsed, not one missionary did we ever see or come through. It was not faith promise. The support to the missionaries was sporadic. And the church, to help pay the bills, because they were struggling, which they shouldn't have been, we were running about 200, 250 in a little town, was pulling from missions, which is illegal, to help pay other bills in the church, which isn't even legal to do. It's an illegal activity. You can't do that. If it's been designated for that, you can't pull it to pay something else without a church vote. And again, faith promise wasn't part of it, and so the missions was sporadic. It wasn't there. So it is a systematic approach based on what we see taking place with the Apostle Paul to meet the need of world missions, of going before the church and say, listen, there's a need in world missions. We need an offering for this. And it's systemized in the fact that usually what a church does is they ask you to give to it once a month, once a week, that you determine this is what I'm going to give. We don't want it arbitrary as a church because, one, we have to do things decently in order. I'm a pastor. I got a budget. I need an idea of what's going to come into missions so I can use wisdom with what we're going to do with the missions fund. How much do I need to set aside for projects? How many missionaries can we take on right now? What are we going to do? So it's just simply using wisdom to do things decently in order to get things accomplished. Is everybody following? Make sense? Now, let's go over, before Paul made this statement in chapter, let's go to chapter 8. Look at the first couple of verses here of chapter 8. Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction and abundance of their joy and their deep poverty, abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, and yea, beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift, the offering to help meet the need in the churches, the church of Jerusalem, and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped first, but gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. Now, what's important about these verses, we already know, I've already established the fact of that Paul went to the churches that he had started on his second missionary journey. He did Galatia as well, though there's no recording that. We know that, though, because of the representation he takes with him at the conclusion of his third missionary journey back to Jerusalem. It's amazing what he did. He basically takes people from each region. He established churches. They're traveling with him. Achaia, Macedonia, Galatia. And this is going to be huge because one thing Paul wanted to avoid was the idea of, which was sort of taking place, a Jewish church and a Gentile church. He wanted everybody to see it as one. Well, this was an opportunity for that right now to take place. And so he took representatives from the different areas. So it's likely that the churches in Galatia also got involved in this offering. So from chapter 8, what we develop is just how we should go about it. All right, how we should go about doing faith promise. So Macedonia, I'll get more into this in the next hour. I don't want to get too much into this and ruin my Sunday morning message. Of course, modern day Greece is where it sits, and it was a major province and was there. And so Paul, all these churches were established on Paul's second missionary journey. Philippi, Berea, Thessalonica, Corinth. And so he's coming back through. When he left Ephesus, the whole goal is simply get to Jerusalem. Originally, he wanted to be there by the Passover. It's not going to work out because they try to kill him. So he gets there by Pentecost. And so he's traveling back through to collect this offering to bring back to the saints at Jerusalem. And I think that's important for a lot of reasons. One, think about this. When you think about Paul's heart for this particular project, I mean, you can tell it sort of consumed him to a degree when you're reading his writings. It's fine. She just likes it. Amen. That's my amen right there. That's what that is. And what was Paul's name from Acts when we first introduced him? Which I actually think we see him in Acts chapter 7. I can make a really good case for that with Stephen. Where we know he gave the consent. I also believe he was the one debating with Stephen. We see him in Acts chapter 7, converted in Acts chapter 9. Then we see his name changed, of course. What was his name prior? Saul. And what was Saul known for? What was his job? What's that? Pharisee. That's right. And what was his mission before he got saved? Yeah, that's right. He was there to stomp out Christianity. He was the person put responsible for that. He was the one who gave consent under the very first martyr's death. That is Stephen. He did that. I want you to think about this. So he imprisoned people. He broke up families. Personally, when you just meditate upon this, with Paul's burden for this, I just wonder if Paul knew some of those families, he was responsible for the suffering they were going through. And he's trying to do just something to help them right now. And so anyhow, Paul, in instructing Corinth, which was just in a little bit different province, just south of Macedonia where they're sitting, he reminded them what took place at the churches at Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. And Macedonia at this time, by the way, it wasn't quite the economic powerhouse that Corinth was, because Corinth certainly was. They were much more ravaged by battle, and there really certainly wouldn't have been the level of finances that were available that would have been even in a place like Corinth, due to everything that had taken place economically there that really would have hurt it, and plus the Roman taxation and everything else that was there. So Paul is dealing with this section with what those churches did to help meet the need of the suffering saints that were at the church in Jerusalem. And the need, and it is dealing, of course, financially. I think we all understand that. So he's encouraged them to give. So let me take from this to show you how they gave. First off, look at verse 1 and 2. Verse 1 and 2. Moreover, brethren, we do you wit to the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction and abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. first thing I want you to notice here in how they went about giving, the churches of Macedonia, towards this need, which Paul had already asked them, listen, I want you to do this by faith. I want you to seek the Lord, seek what you could do to help meet this need, which is all your local church Cornerstone's doing right here to its own membership. Please, we have a need in world missions. We need to meet this. We want to take an offering up in a systematic way that we can meet this need. All right. So how did they go about that? And let's try and draw some things that can help us. One, they looked for reasons on why they should give, not at the reasons why they shouldn't give. All right. We see that here. He said, man, they're in great trial of affliction. The abundance of their joy, their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. In other words, Paul knew these churches were struggling economically. I mean, you think about it. Outside of the church at Philippi, especially the church at Thessalonica and Berea, they were under immense persecution. Philippi had a measure of protection. I'll cover that in the morning service, why they had a measure of protection. And so he understands that they're suffering economically. I mean, if any church could find a reason why we don't need to give, it was them. If they wanted to look for reasons why we can't do it, you know how many people live their life that they look all the time at reasons why something can't be done instead of why it can be done. So one thing I want you to notice is you're praying what the Lord have you to do today towards faith promise. Just think of why it can be done instead of all the things of why something can't be done. Because the fact is we do what we want to do. That's just the truth. We do what we want to do. The difference then when you're diving into that principle is this. It deals with their heart. They had a heart to do this. And the Bible says where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's very true. So they know they had a heart from this. I have no doubt. And that came from the Apostle Paul who started it with it. You can just imagine his passionate plea, your responsibility. I mean, I sure he went up, man, this is the very first church. This is the one, I'm sure he talked to Peter and the other apostles and said, listen, we need to be a help here. And so their heart was following. So they didn't just simply look at, well, I'm sorry, we can't. We're struggling right now ourselves. We just can't do this. They looked at why they could give. Number two, they did give, as we see in verse 2, regardless of circumstances, trusting God. Even though economically it was a great struggle for the churches in Macedonia, they still gave. Again, it showed it was by a measure of faith. When it comes to faith, sometimes some of the teaching, preaching, just individual conversations can go just across a spectrum of what is meant by that or how that's going to be used. And just like our faith before the Lord, when we have to consider, let's say you're lost and you're considering the truth of the gospel. All right. The faith that we have when we present to the lost world is a faith that is based in reason. It is. I mean, if you think about it, when we approach someone, we're dealing with someone with the truth of who God is, the truth of the Lord Jesus Christ, what happened at the cross, why that had to take place. It all makes sense. You follow me? It makes, when you're developing it, you can see, well, there has to be a creator. Look around you. I mean, everything shouts of a creator. It says you'd be a fool to say there is no creator, and that's very true. It makes sense that there is a creator. So faith, even at that base level, is based on reason. All right? It's not like I'm trying to go around and say, listen, I got news for you. There's a goat over here. Did you see that goat? That's the creator. That's why that goat's there. He's checking on us. He's overseeing us right there. That goat is coming by here because that goat is the creator. We all laugh at that. Why? Because intellectually we know that's foolishness. All right. Biblical faith is based on reason. Well, apply the same thing to faith promise when you're praying what the Lord have you to do. All right. You do use faith, not circumstances, but use God-given reason as you're going through it. In other words, if you make $1,000 a month, don't pledge $1,100. Use some reason. You say, but I'm using faith. Use some reason with your faith. So, they gave regardless of circumstances, trusting God. I do think it is so important that you spend much more time, you and your wife, on your knees. Let's pray, see what the Lord have us to do than you do in front of a calculator. I do. I think faith is an important part, but you base it in reason. Okay? Look at verse 3 and 4. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift. Now this is kind of neat. I like this one. It says with much entreaty. In other words, what that means is they couldn't wait to give this to Paul with much enthusiasm. With much enthusiasm. The word means exhortation. In other words, they really wanted to do this. When I was on my first furlough, I had a small supporting church outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I was reporting back. I still remember it was the last Sunday in October of 2007. We had a really good service. And that church, we had noticed, even though they were a small church, they really followed us on the field. They'd sent a couple of extra offerings from their church ministry or their children's ministry the children had raised, and some cards. It was always just sweet. And so I was there just for a Sunday night service. That was it. So I'm there, and we had a good service. The service is over with. We're in the fellowship hall just talking with some of the men. There's 3 or 4 of the men around me. And one of them had asked, I never brought it up, they said, what does it cost for you and your family to go there? I said, well, when we fly back, I said, it'll be just over $12,000 one way, which was the cost. It was over $12,000 one way. It was by far our biggest expense we had was traveling in and out because I had 5 kids. And he goes, wow, he goes, do you have any of that? I said, I don't have any of that yet. And that was all that was said. We talked about other things. I left. It's 1 month later, just over a month later. It's now the first Sunday in December. Sunday morning, I was preaching in Tennessee. Sunday night, I'm preaching in Georgia. And in between, I'm at McDonald's. So I'm sitting in McDonald's, and my phone rings. It's the pastor of that small church. He called with much entreaty. He was so enthusiastic. He couldn't wait to tell me. I had no idea. He said, since you left, we started collecting an offering to help cover your need to get back. Now think about this. It's a tiny church. They're not nearly in some economic powerhouse. They were about 20 miles outside of the Fayetteville area, a little town. It'll hit me here at some point. Just a small little town. And it's Christmas time. You're also trying to put money aside for your kids. It was the entire month of November. And he said, we raised $12,000 towards your tickets. Where do we send it? And then he goes, and if you need anything more, if those tickets come up to 13, 14, 15, let us know. We want to cover that too. And he did it you could hear it in his voice. He could not wait to make that phone call. One, he knew I had no idea they were doing it. Not a clue. It was with much, they couldn't wait to give it. It's the same way with missions. If you would understand what it's about, what it's going to do, it changes how you give it. It changes how you give it with much entreaty. So I like that they gave it with exhortation, if you will. And so, when we look at these different things, how does all this help us with faith promise? One, we give by faith, looking for reasons to give and not reasons why we can't give. Look for why you can do this, not why you can't do it. Use faith. You seek the Lord. You seek God's wisdom. You seek God's direction, focusing on Him. Listen, because the truth is there's 7 billion reasons to give to missions. There is. You give with enthusiasm. You know, Paul's going to mention later on in the same letter that God loveth a cheerful giver. And we're familiar with that verse. And that's true. You can think about this when those who are parents or even married, the same thing applies. When it comes to like Christmas time, and you happen to have bought your wife or one of your kids a really nice gift, you really, during that time, you could care less what you're going to open for Christmas. You cannot wait to see their expression when they open it. You can't wait for that. That's the truth. If you actually have genuine love and a serious relationship with wife and children, when you've invested, like I remember our first furlough, I could not wait for our kids because all of them, what we did was we bought all of them on our first furlough an instrument with lessons until we went back 6 months later to the field. And so I couldn't wait. I had no clue what I got that year for Christmas. Really don't care. I just couldn't wait for them to open it, just so I could see their faces. All right. It's the same thing if you could sort of approach it even with missions, to be able to empower your pastor to make that call to that missionary. Say, hey, we took you on. I know what that's like. I had my Excel spreadsheet ready to go with every church that called me up. Hey, we voted you on. Boom, boom, percentages here. Boom, boom, percentages here. It's ready to go every single time. With all those readjusting. When could I leave? When could I leave? When could I get there? So you give, you use faith. You look for a reason to give, not to give. You give with enthusiasm. And then as that one verse that I read, you have the right motive in this, by the way. It's always important for the Lord, especially if you want God to bless you, reward you when you get to heaven or even here. You have the right motive, and that's to glorify God. You make this about the Lord, not about anything else. And even these cards, I know my church does it that way, and I think you've already said that, there's not going to be any names on them. There's going to be no names on them when you're saying, listen, Pastor, this is what I plan to do each week or each month towards missions. There's no names on them. You know, it's just so he can sit down and use some wisdom of this is what we can do with missions this year. And another thing where that benefits without the name, though, is the fact that just make it about glorifying God. Don't make it about you. Don't make it about, look what I'm doing. It's never about you. Do you understand that? It never is. It's always about God. Make it about Him. All right, so how do we go about this? Usually we have a missions conference. We have a missions conference where usually the weeks leading up to it, the pastor starts to encourage you to pray. Pray what the Lord would have you to do this next year towards missions. Start seeking the Lord. Start now using faith, using reason. Start praying what you will give towards world missions for this next year. Because there is a need, just like the need at Jerusalem. The need is world missions. This giving is not your tithe. I remember I had several churches, one church in Louisiana. What I should have did, but that would have been, it would have been received wrong had I did this. But he was also against faith promise. And they were only able to support us about 2 months, and that was it, and nothing more. But he had a great goal. He said, no, we're not going to do faith promise. He goes, our goal is to get to a place, and I've heard some churches' success with this, but I think that is the exception and not the rule. I don't think it's a systematic way of doing it. That 80% of our tithes goes towards world missions. Do you know that what it takes to operate a church? Do you know that when salaries, you have staff, the expenses that go with that? So what I'm saying is that's not, you can make all the arguments you want. It's just not using wisdom to go about this. When we see here what's taking place, wasn't Paul talking about you pull from the tithes from your operating expenses of your church? He says, no, we are taking up another offering, a chance for you to give towards this is what he was doing. So it's the same thing that's taking place here. So you're asking to pray about a certain amount that you would give towards world missions after you sought the Lord. It has nothing to do with the tithe whatsoever. And the promise is a faith commitment. This is for this next year. This is what we're going to do. And when those cards get passed out, you simply write that down there and you turn those in. And you go from there. All right. Make sense? All right. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. I'm done. Father in heaven, Lord, we certainly love you. We thank you for your word. I pray that you bless today, Lord. I pray that you'd help Cornerstone as they do seek you and what they're going to do towards the cause of world missions this year. And again, Lord, bless the next services. Lord, I love you. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.